You are no longer my Luna. Step down from the throne. You have no place there anymore.
The great hall of Ashenveil had never been so silent. Every commander, every elder, every warrior who had pledged their life to this kingdom stood frozen, breath held, eyes wide as the words left the Alpha's mouth. 5 words, spoken like a verdict, like a sentence handed down from a judge who had already decided the outcome long before the trial began. Luna Seraphine didn't flinch. She stood at the center of the hall, her silver gown catching the light of 100 flames, her dark hair pinned beneath a crown that suddenly felt heavier than iron. Around her, the court watched in disbelief, some with mouths open, some with tears already forming, but none of them moved. Because he was the Alpha, and Alpha Calum never made mistakes. At least, that's what they used to believe. His jaw was tight, his golden eyes that had once looked at Seraphine like she was the sun rising over a winter storm, were cold now, empty, like something behind them had simply switched off. A sound rippled through the hall, something between a gasp and a grief. The head commander, Davin, took one step forward before stopping himself. The Elder Council exchanged glances, sharp, alarmed, confused. Seraphine said nothing for a long moment. Then she lifted her chin, not in defiance, not in anger, in something far more devastating than either. "Very well, then I will step down." And she did, slowly, with the kind of grace that cannot be taught, only earned through years of carrying impossible weight with impossible dignity. She descended the steps of the dais one by one, and the court parted before her like water. No one spoke, no one breathed, but every single person in that room felt the same thing. Something had just broken that could not be unbroken. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time, not long ago, though it already felt like another lifetime, when Calum and Seraphine were spoken of in the same breath as the moon and the tide. Inevitable, inseparable, each one making the other more powerful than they could ever be alone. He had chosen her not because she was beautiful, though she was, not because she was strong, though she was. He had chosen her because when the world pressed in from all sides, when the weight of the crown threatened to crush him entirely, she was the only thing that made the silence bearable. She would sit beside him during council meetings and say nothing for hours, but when she did speak, every room shifted. "She sees 10 moves ahead," Commander Davin once said. "She just lets everyone else think they got there first." Calum had loved that about her, had relied on it, had trusted it more than his own instincts, more than his own sword arm. They had built Ashenveil together, not just as king and queen, but as partners, real ones. The kind who argue at midnight and forgive before dawn. The kind who carry each other's secrets like sacred burdens and never once think about putting them down. They had children together, a daughter, 7 years old, who had her father's eyes and her mother's fearlessness. 2 sons, one 4 years old, who laughed at everything and cried at nothing, and somehow made the whole kingdom feel lighter just by existing. The other one was 8 months old, still a baby, innocent and bubbly all the time. They were nothing but a perfect family. This was their life. And then she arrived. She came on a rainy Tuesday, alone, injured and trembling at the gates of Ashenveil. Her name was Mira. She said she'd escaped from a rival pack, one known for cruelty, known for using their own members as weapons. She showed the guards the marks on her back. She showed them the fear in her eyes. She showed them everything a woman fleeing violence is supposed to show. And it worked, because it was supposed to. The guards brought her in, The healers cleaned her wounds, and when Seraphine heard about the stranger in the lower halls, cold, alone, frightened, she did what she always did. She went to her herself. "You don't have to be afraid here," Seraphine told her, sitting at the edge of the cot, offering warm broth with both hands. "Ashenveil doesn't turn away the wounded." Mira looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes. "You're the Luna," she whispered, like she couldn't believe it. "I'm just Seraphine," she replied. "Rest. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." What Seraphine didn't see, what no one in that room saw, was the flicker that crossed Mira's face the moment the door closed. Not gratitude, not relief, something colder, something patient, something that had been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. By the next morning, Mira had already begun her work. She was quiet, careful. She didn't demand attention, she waited for it to come to her. And in a kingdom as busy as Ashenveil, where everyone had somewhere to be and something to prove, a quiet, grateful woman who needed nothing and offered warmth was dangerously easy to trust. She helped in the kitchens, she volunteered in the healing halls, she asked questions about the pack with wide, fascinated eyes. What are the rituals here? How does the council work? Who does the Alpha trust most? And people answered, because she asked so gently, because she seemed so harmless. Within a week, she knew more about Ashenveil than most soldiers who'd served for years. Meanwhile, Seraphine began to notice something subtle, so subtle she almost dismissed it. Calum was quieter than usual, not in his careful, measured way, in a different way, a heavier way. Like something was sitting on his chest that he hadn't named yet. "Are you all right?" she asked him one evening. "Fine," he said, and smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. She told herself it was the pressure of the season, the upcoming treaty negotiations, the drought in the Western Territory that was making the border packs restless. She told herself it would pass. She was wrong. 3 weeks after Mira's arrival, Seraphine found her standing in the corridor outside Callum's private study at midnight, completely alone. "Mira, what are you doing up here?" Mira turned. Her expression was perfectly calibrated, soft, embarrassed, apologetic. "I'm sorry, I couldn't sleep. I was just walking. I didn't realize how far I'd wandered." Seraphine looked at her for a long moment. Something small and cold moved through her chest, a whisper of instinct that she immediately quieted. "Come on," she said. "I'll walk you back." She did. She was kind about it. She didn't even mention it to Callum. That was her first mistake. Because Mira wasn't wandering, she had been precisely where she intended to be. Learning the rhythms of the Alpha's schedule, mapping the patterns of his solitude, calculating exactly when he was most alone, most vulnerable, most reachable. Later, much later, when everything had already fallen apart, Seraphine would think back to that midnight corridor, to the instinct she silenced, to the question she didn't ask. She would wonder what might have changed if she had. But that was later. This was never a coincidence. Mira was patient the way rivers are patient. She didn't rush, she didn't push. She simply moved, slowly, quietly, inevitably, wearing down everything in her path. She had identified Seraphine's weakness within 24 hours of arriving. The Luna's compassion was total and unconditional. She did not divide her care into portions. She did not issue trust in installments. When she opened her heart to you, she opened all of it. To Mira, this was not admirable. It was a door. Over the next 2 weeks, she pried it open carefully, one conversation at a time. She learned about the pack's territorial boundaries. She learned about the upcoming treaty with the northern clans, which packs were uncertain, which elders had doubts, which commanders had grievances they'd never voiced in council. She learned about Calem's one true insecurity, the fear that his strength made him unreachable, that the crown had turned him into a symbol rather than a man, that Seraphine had become so capable, so self-sufficient, that sometimes he wondered if she still needed him at all. She stored every piece of information like ammunition, and then she began to use it. It started small. A comment here, a carefully placed silence there. "I noticed Elder Rowe looking at you strangely during the council meeting," Mira said to Seraphine one afternoon, her voice low and gentle. "Is everything all right between you?" "Elder Rowe? He's been with the pack for 30 years. We've never had a conflict." "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. I noticed something. Maybe I misread it." She didn't push. She never pushed. She planted the seed and walked away, leaving Seraphine to water it herself. By that evening, Seraphine was replaying every conversation she'd had with Elder Rowe in the past month, looking for something she might have missed, something she might have said wrong. She found nothing, because there was nothing to find, but the doubt had taken root. This was Mira's gift. She didn't create conflict. She revealed fictional versions of conflict that felt indistinguishable from real ones. She twisted existing tensions just enough that they became unrecognizable. She didn't lie, not exactly. She simply rearranged the truth. And she did it to everyone. Calem had dismissed Mira the first time he saw her. A refugee, a wounded woman. He had nothing but sympathy for her situation and no particular interest in her beyond that. Mira knew this. She had expected it. She didn't try to seduce him. That would have been too obvious, too easy to resist, too easy to report to Seraphine. Instead, she made herself useful. She began appearing in spaces where he was alone, the training yard at dawn, the outer parapets at dusk, never too close, never uninvited, just present, quiet, undemanding. And when he finally spoke to her out of simple courtesy, she listened. Not the way people listen when they're waiting to speak, the way people listen when every word matters, when they're holding what you say like something precious. "You seem tired," she said to him once, after a particularly brutal council session that Calem hadn't mentioned to anyone. He looked at her sharply. "How did you know about the council?" "I didn't," she said simply. "You just look the way a man looks when he's carrying something no one has offered to carry with him." He should have walked away. He didn't. But Mira was not relying on conversation alone. She had brought something with her to Ashenveil, something that had no name in the common tongue, but that the oldest elders would have recognized on sight, a practice, a craft, old and patient and hungry, like everything ancient tends to be. It didn't announce itself. It worked the way rot works in the roots of a tree, invisible from the outside, devastating from within. It started with Calem's dreams, vivid, disorienting. He dreamed of betrayal, of council members laughing behind his back, of Seraphine turning away from him, cold, indifferent, already gone. He woke from these dreams exhausted and vaguely angry, unable to name the source of the anger, unable to shake it. He told himself it was stress. He started sleeping later, attending fewer council meetings, delegating more than he should. Little by little, the man who had once been the first one in the room and the last to leave became someone who stood slightly outside everything, watching with narrowed eyes, trusting nothing. And Mira was always nearby to offer explanation. "People get tired of good leaders," she said once quietly. "They confuse reliability with weakness. It's not you, it's them." He knew on some level that this was manipulation. He was not a fool. He had led a kingdom for 12 years on instincts alone. But the magic had already begun to dull those instincts, and Mira knew exactly how to speak to the version of him that was left. Seraphine noticed the change in her husband the way you notice a season shifting, gradually, then all at once. He was shorter with her, slower to share. When she reached for his hand in counsel, he let her hold it but didn't hold back. "Something is wrong," she said to him one night directly. "Tell me." "Nothing is wrong," he said. "Calum." "I said nothing is wrong, Seraphine. Not everything needs to be a conversation." She was quiet. He had never spoken to her that way before. She went to find Mira that same night, not with suspicion, but because Mira had become, against all logic, one of the few people in the palace she felt she could speak to honestly. Mira, who had no agenda, no political ambitions, no stake in the court's power games. Or so she believed. "Do you think I push too hard?" she asked her. "Do you think I make him feel less than?" And Mira, with perfect, devastating gentleness, said, "I think you are extraordinary, Seraphine, but sometimes extraordinary people forget that the people who love them need to feel extraordinary too." Seraphine absorbed this, held it, turned it over like a stone. She never considered that the woman across from her had put the stone in her hands specifically so she would hold it. And that was only the beginning. The court noticed before Seraphine allowed herself to. Calum began contradicting her in open counsel, not cruelly at first, but consistently. Where once he had finished her sentences, he now interrupted them. Where once he had deferred to her judgment on matters of diplomacy and strategy, he now waved her contributions aside with a hand that seemed almost impatient. Commander Davin pulled her aside after one such meeting. "My Luna, something is wrong with him." "He's under pressure," Seraphine said. "That's not pressure," Davin said. "I've seen him under pressure. This is something else." She looked at the old commander for a long time. He had served Ashenveil for 30 years. He had never once told her something that wasn't true. "Give it time," she said finally. She was protecting Calum, even then, even as he was, though she didn't know it yet, being systematically turned against her. Meanwhile, Mira had become a fixture of the inner court. No one had invited her there. No one had objected either. She moved through the palace like she belonged, and human nature being what it is, presence eventually becomes acceptance. She attended dinners. She sat close to Calum. She smiled at Seraphine across the table with warm, guileless eyes. And every night she continued her work. It happened privately first. Calum called Seraphine to his study late one evening, late enough that the children were already asleep, late enough that the palace had gone quiet, the kind of hour that used to belong to their best conversations, their most honest ones. She came in expecting that. She found something else entirely. He was standing with his back to the window, arms crossed, jaw set. On his desk was a letter, one she had never seen before. She would later discover it had been placed there by Mira, its contents fabricated, its seal forged. But in that moment, all she saw was the look on her mate's face. "Explain this," he said. She crossed to the desk, read the letter. Her confusion was immediate and genuine. "Calum, I've never seen this before. I don't know what this—" "Stop." His voice was flat. "Just stop." She looked up at him. "You don't believe me." He said nothing. And that silence, that terrible hollow silence where there should have been certainty, was worse than any accusation. "After 12 years," she said quietly, "after everything, you don't believe me?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said, and the frightening part was that he meant it. The magic had taken the ground beneath him, the certainty, the instinct, the bone-deep knowledge of who she was, and replaced it with fog. She didn't yell, she didn't plead. She stood very still and breathed through it. "Then I'm sorry," she said, because there is nothing I can show you that you haven't already decided not to see." She turned and walked out. He didn't call her back. 3 days later came the Great Hall. This was the scene that opened our story, the one Ashenveil would talk about in hushed, horrified tones for years, the one that would be written into pack history not as a decision, but as a wound. "You are no longer my Luna." We know how it began. Now we see how it truly broke. Because standing just beyond Calem's left shoulder, half hidden by the shadows of the great stone columns, was Mira. No one was watching her. All eyes were on Seraphine, on the composed, devastated, impossibly dignified woman descending the dais steps while her world shattered around her. No one saw the expression on Mira's face. Commander Davin saw it. He had been watching the wrong person all along, watching Calem, watching Seraphine, and then by chance he glanced to the left. He caught it for only a fraction of a second before she arranged her face back into careful neutrality. But he caught it. And what he saw was not the look of a rescued woman watching in confused sadness. What he saw was the look of someone watching a performance they had written, directed, and rehearsed, and seeing it executed perfectly. He said nothing in that moment. There were too many witnesses, too much chaos. But he remembered. Before Seraphine left the great hall, she stopped. She turned back to face Calem, not with anger, not with grief, but with the particular steadiness of a woman who has already calculated every possible outcome and chosen the one thing that matters most. "One request," she said. Her voice carried through the silence without effort. Calem hesitated. "Speak." "The children stay in Ashenveil. Whatever happens between us, that doesn't change. They belong here, with their home, with their people. Considering their age, I wish to stay and ensure their care until they become of age. Then and only then will I leave Ashenveil." A long pause. "Agreed," he said. Too quickly. The word came too fast, too easily, like he'd been coached on it, like the answer had already been placed in his mouth. Davin noted this, Seraphine noted this, and Mira, in her column of shadow, permitted herself one small, satisfied exhale. The Luna moved toward the great doors. They opened before her, not by command, but because the guards, whatever they thought of the Alpha's decree, had not lost their respect for her. They could not make her stay, but they could give her this. She walked through them without looking back. Behind her the court erupted into whispers. Calem stood rigid at the dais, and Mira glided forward, quietly, inevitably, into the space Seraphine had just vacated. "My lord," she said softly, "shall I have the arrangements made?" Something flickered across Calem's face, something that might have been doubt, or might have been nausea, or might have been the first stirring of a buried instinct fighting its way back to the surface. He buried it. "Yes," he said. Something about this victory felt wrong. Mira had planned for many things. She had not planned for this, that a kingdom can recognize its soul even when its king cannot. Ashenveil did not accept her. Not dramatically, not with confrontation or rebellion or any of the open resistance she might have anticipated. It was subtler than that, and for that reason more devastating. The servants answered her questions, but never volunteered information. The commanders gave her the courtesy due a guest, but none of the deference due a queen. The children in the lower quarters, who had once run toward Seraphine whenever she passed through, looked at Mira with blank, measuring eyes, and then looked away. She could not command the room the way the Luna had commanded it. She tried, and watched it fail every time, in ways too small to name, but too consistent to ignore. She sat in council and offered opinions that were technically sound, but somehow fell flat. She tried to replicate Seraphine's quiet authority and found she was performing a role she had only observed from the outside, and that the difference was visible to everyone who had known the original. Worst of all, Calum was not what she had expected. Without the magic's full force, without constant reinforcement, he was unstable, oscillating. Some mornings he was cold and cooperative, others he stood at the window with his jaw tight and his eyes far away, and she recognized with the first real thread of alarm she had felt in months that she was losing the ground she had gained. Commander Davin did not believe in coincidences. He had served Ashenveil long enough to know that when something felt wrong, it usually was, and that waiting for proof was a luxury people only had in peacetime. He began quietly, a conversation with the gate guards about the night of Mira's arrival, a visit to the healer who had treated her wounds, a very careful, very private correspondence with 3 trusted soldiers in the Northern Territories, the territories Mira claimed to have fled from. The responses came back within 4 days. There was no such woman on any record in the Northern Pacts. The pack she had claimed to flee from had been at peace with their neighbors for 3 years. No refugee matching her description had been reported missing or escaped. She had appeared from nowhere, because she had come from exactly nowhere. Davin next sought the counsel of the oldest member of the Elder Council, an ancient, half-blind woman named Orion, who had spent 60 years studying the darker edges of pack history. He described Calum's behavior changes, the dreams the Alpha had mentioned offhandedly weeks ago, the mood shifts, the erosion of instinct. Orion was silent for a long time. Then she said, "That is a mark of diminishment. Very old, very illegal. Whoever placed it on your Alpha did not come here by accident." Davin's expression didn't change. "Can it be reversed?" "Yes," she said, "but not before she's gone." Mira felt the shift in the air before she saw any evidence of it. That was her gift, the same hypersensitivity to power dynamics that had made her so effective as an infiltrator. She could read a room before she entered it. She could feel the temperature of trust from across a corridor. And on the 5th morning after Davin began his investigation, she felt something change. The guard's pauses became a fraction too long. The servant's eyes held a fraction too much. The Elder Council had requested a private session. Not unusual, but the timing was. Her suspicions were confirmed when she eavesdropped Elder Davin speaking to one of the pack commanders one evening. He was updating him on his discoveries, his investigations and fears. She could not wait to hear everything. All she knew was that it was just a matter of time before she was exposed. This was not good on her assignment and her contract. She did not wait. She packed nothing, took nothing that could be tracked, left her room immaculate and her bed made, and every document she'd ever touched carefully arranged exactly as she'd found it. And then she walked out of Ashenveil in the hour before dawn, through the western gate, wearing the cloak of a laundry servant. She was gone before the first light hit the eastern towers. Calum woke to an empty palace. When he was told Mira was gone, vanished, no trace, no explanation, something happened in him that neither the magic nor the manipulation nor 12 years of leadership could fully control. He panicked. And then he did the thing men do when they panic and don't know what they are afraid of. He found the nearest available target. "Seraphine," he said, his voice hard and hollow in the way it had been for weeks. "You did this. You drove her out." Davin stood before him very still. "My Alpha," he said carefully, "I think you should sit down. There are things I need you to hear." "I don't need to sit." "Please," said Davin, and there was something in the old commander's voice, not command, not challenge, just wait, that made Calum stop. He agreed to sit down. They went to his study, leaving the Luna standing alone, still confused. What she felt at that moment could not be described in any format. Hurt was there, anger was there, even confusion was there. It was a mixture of emotions in equal portions. In the Alpha's study, Davin laid the documents on the desk, the correspondence from the north, Orion's findings, his own notes, and then he waited while the Alpha read. He was wrong, again. Orion performed the reversal in the Alpha's private chambers, with only Davin and 2 trusted elders present. It was not a dramatic process. There was no fire, no flash of light, no theatrical climax. It was quiet, disturbingly, achingly quiet. The old woman placed her hands on Calem's temples and worked in silence for nearly 20 minutes while he sat with his eyes closed and his breathing slowly changed. When she was done, she stepped back. Calem opened his eyes, and just like that, the fog was gone. Not metaphorically, not gradually, gone, the way a window clears after weeks of frost, all at once, revealing a world that had been there the entire time, waiting to be seen. He remembered everything, every conversation, every decision, every cold word, every moment where Seraphine had reached for him and he had turned away. Every single thing he had done in the past 2 months passed through him in a wave so precise, so complete, that he had to grip the arms of the chair to keep himself upright. He requested for a moment alone. Davin took that time to ensure that Orion was secretly escorted to her quarters. The Alpha King took time to think, nothing tangible, his mind was racing. He just didn't know what to do, where to start, and how to start all over again. He finally called for Elder Davin. "The children," he said immediately. "Are they—" "Safe," Davin said. Seraphine made sure of it. "And Seraphine, where is she?" Davin's expression was carefully neutral. "The western wing. She never left the palace. She refused. I am sure when we left her in the hall, she went back to the western wing." Of course she had. Where else could she be? The palace was no longer a place she enjoyed strolling or lingering around. The sorry faces she saw were unbearable. Every pack member, big and small, felt sorry for her, but never said a word. But their respect for her never ceased. Calem pressed his hands over his face for a long moment. When he lowered them, his eyes were red at the edges. Not from crying, not yet, but from the effort of holding it back. "Take me to her," he said. "She may not want to see you," Davin said. "I know. I need to see her anyway." The western wing was where the palace stored its quieter things, old tapestries, seasonal furniture, the portraits of kings and queens who had come before, watching the corridor with painted eyes that gave nothing away. Seraphine had made it her own in the weeks since the Great Hall. She had added a desk beneath the window, piled with correspondence she had continued to answer even without a title. She had arranged flowers in a vase she'd found in a storage room. She had made the space habitable, functional, hers, because that was simply who she was. She didn't require a throne to carry herself like one. Calem stood outside the door for a full 3 minutes before he knocked. She knew it was him. She had heard the footsteps. "Come in," she said. He entered. The room was lit by afternoon light through tall windows. She was seated at the desk, her pen in her hand, her posture straight. She looked at him without expression, not coldly, but carefully, the way you look at something you are not yet sure how to react towards or what to expect. He crossed the room, and then, to the astonishment of every invisible witness in the history of Ashenveil, Calem, son of Arden, Alpha of the Ashenveil Pack, 12-year ruler of the most powerful kingdom in the Northern Territories, lowered himself to his knees. Not as a gesture, not as theater, as the only honest thing he knew how to do with his body in that moment. Seraphine's pen went still.
"I don't know where to start," he said. His voice was rough. "There's too much to say, and I know I don't deserve the time it would take." She said nothing, but she didn't look away. "She used magic," he said. "Davin has the evidence. Orion reversed it this morning. I'm not telling you this as an excuse. I'm telling you because you deserve to know exactly what was done, not just to us, to me, that I let it happen." "You didn't know," she said quietly. "I should have," he said. "My instincts, our years together, none of that should have been overwritten that easily, which means I was already carrying something she could use, some doubt, some distance I hadn't named. She found it and she built a palace in it, and He stopped, steadied himself. "I said things to you that I cannot take back. I made you walk out of the hall we built together. I agreed too quickly to keep the children because a part of me didn't want to lose you." He looked at her, not at the crown she no longer wore, not at the title she no longer carried, at her, Seraphine, the person. "I am sorry," he said, "not as your alpha, not as your mate, just as the person who was supposed to know you best in this world and chose not to." Seraphine was quiet for a long time. Outside, the palace went about its business. Somewhere in the lower corridors, their daughter was probably terrorizing the training yard, and their elder son was probably laughing at something only he could hear. The youngest son, well, she had seen him an hour ago when he fell asleep on her lap after a long breastfeeding session. The world kept moving, indifferent to the conversation happening in this quiet room between two people trying to find each other across the rubble of what had been. Seraphine's mind and emotions were racing. She couldn't tell which one surfaced first, but she was certain she was just not ready to accept the Alpha's apology. The humiliation, the accusation this morning, it was all too big for her to swallow at once. "Whether she used magic or not, you permitted her to manipulate you. You chose to humiliate me. Loving someone else is never a passport to humiliate the one you once loved," she finally said, not even sure if her words came out in the correct format. The Alpha wanted to plead. "You were coming back to me because she has left you. Are you not the same person who was accusing me of driving her away? What has changed now? I requested to stay for my children, not as your fallback plan. Please let me leave. I have already made peace with fate." With this, she turned her back on him. She didn't want him to see her tears. Her eyes were heavy with tears. She had kept them at bay for a long time, and finally her emotions had allowed her to let go. The Alpha stayed on his knees for a while. He was vulnerable. He cried with sobs, and Seraphine, though giving him her back, was also sobbing. The pain was greater than the pain she felt the day he rejected her. It felt like getting pierced on an unhealed wound. She finally stopped crying, went over to the Alpha, and helped him to stand from his knees. Then she softly asked him to give her some space to process everything. The Alpha understood. He simply nodded and left. Later that evening, the Alpha came again to visit her. He had no tangible reason for visiting. He just came. They sat quietly as if they were strangers trying to find the best way to know each other. This became the Alpha's routine. Random visits twice or thrice a day. Gifts sent for no reason. Deliberate assignment of staff to the Western Wing. Afternoon sessions with the children. Seraphine wore a brave face during the day, but daily her heart was beginning to melt. She was falling again for the man she had loved before with no condition. One night she just couldn't sleep. Her wolf was uneasy inside her. She began to rewind what had happened, and she made a decision that made her feel peace. That morning, as was now his routine, the Alpha King came to have breakfast with her. They sat quietly as usual, until Seraphine broke the silence for the first time in 2 weeks since he had knelt down asking for her forgiveness. She didn't create something from nothing.
Seraphine said finally. He looked up. She found real things, she continued carefully. The distance, the unspoken fears, the moments where we were side by side but not really together. I saw her do it, and I didn't ask the right questions because I was so convinced my compassion was a virtue that I never once asked if it could be a weapon in someone else's hands. She set her coffee mug down, turned to face him fully. I'm not forgiving what happened. Not today. Maybe not for a while. I know, he said. But I'm also not leaving, she said. And not because of the children this time, or the kingdom, or because I don't have somewhere to go. Because this, she gestured between them, is still worth the work if you're willing to do it differently. Not blind, he said, understanding immediately. Not titles. Real, she said. He reached up and took her hand. She let him. And for a moment they stayed exactly like that, neither one in position of power over the other, exactly equal in the only way that had ever mattered. Outside the window, Ashenveil stretched in every direction, the territory they had built, the kingdom their children would inherit, the home that had survived, barely, but survived, because two people who loved each other had finally decided to be honest. Seraphine rose from her chair. Calum rose from his. They walked to the door together, and when they opened it, when they stepped back into the corridor, back into the palace, back into the world that had watched them fall and was now watching them return, they did it side by side. Not as Alpha and Luna, not as king and queen, as partners, real ones, eyes open. No enemy would ever stand between them again, because this time they would stand side by side.